Somewhere in Britain right now, a kitchen window glows against the dark. But there are places across this country where the locals lock the door at a certain hour and will tell you not to be out after dark. There is a road in Wales where drivers report the same figure at the same bend. A railway platform where staff will not work the last shift alone. A village the bus stopped serving after sundown. I have gone through local press, coroner reports, parish records, and the testimonies of people who live there to bring you the creepiest places in the United Kingdom that locals warn you not to visit after dark. Everyone is real and somewhere you could drive to tonight. It begins with a single set of headlights on a road that should not feel this empty. Let us begin in Scotland, where the most documented case in British road history awaits. A 30-mile stretch so active that transport police maintain files they would rather not discuss. The A75 runs between Annan and Gretna in Dumfries and Galloway. To look at it during daylight, you would see nothing remarkable. Flat farmland, the distant shimmer of the Solway Firth, lorries heading for the ferry ports. But after dark, this road becomes something else entirely. On the night of the 22nd of October 1957, Derek Ferguson and his brother Norman were driving this stretch when their headlights caught something impossible. A large hen appeared in the road, then a cat, then more animals, too many to count, rushing at the windscreen. Then an old woman ran straight at the car. Derek slammed the brakes. Nothing there. They drove on. A great furniture van hurtled toward them, forcing them off the road. It vanished before impact. That night, they encountered screaming creatures, eyeless faces pressed against the glass, and phantom vehicles that existed only long enough to terrify. The brothers reported everything to police. Their account remains on file to this day. What makes the A75 exceptional is not the Ferguson incident alone, but the decades of reports that followed. Phantom trucks appear in rear-view mirrors and never pass. Figures stand at roadsides and vanish when approached. Hauliers who run this route regularly speak of colleagues who refuse night shifts on the Kinmount Strait. One transport company operating from Carlisle confirmed in 2012 that 3 of their drivers had requested permanent transfer from the Scotland run, citing experiences they would not discuss in detail. The road earned its reputation. Locals do not dispute it. They simply drive home before sunset. Travelling south into Kent, we find Bluebell on the A229 between Maidstone and Rochester. This stretch of dual carriageway passes through the North Downs, cutting through chalk hills that have been walked for thousands of years. On summer days, the view across the Medway Valley is magnificent. On certain nights, drivers encounter a woman who should not be there. On the 19th of November 1965, a Ford Cortina carrying 3 young women crashed on Bluebell Hill. Judith Lingham was due to be married the following day. She died at the scene. Her friends Suzanne Brown and Patricia Ferguson also lost their lives in the wreckage. Since that night, drivers have reported striking a young woman on this road, stopping their cars in panic and finding nothing. In November 1992, a driver named Ian Sharp was so convinced he had hit a pedestrian that he flagged down a passing motorist and insisted they call police. Officers searched the roadside with dogs and torches for 2 hours. They found no body, no blood, no evidence anyone had been struck. The Kent police file on Bluebell Hill contains multiple similar reports spanning 5 decades. Drivers arriving at Maidstone Station, shaking, certain they have killed someone. Officers returning from the scene with nothing to show for their search. Some locals believe it is Judith, still trying to reach her wedding. Others say the phenomenon predates the 1965 crash. The hill has been associated with strange sightings since the Roman road passed through here. What drivers see may be older than any of them can explain. Crossing into Devon, we reach Dartmoor and the B3212 that connects Moreton Hampstead to Princetown. This road passes through some of the most desolate landscape in southern England. Prison walls rise from the mist at Princetown. Ponies stand motionless beside the tarmac. The moor stretches away in every direction, empty and old. The hairy hands first appeared in records during the 1920s. Motorcyclists reported feeling invisible hands wrench their handlebars, forcing them off the road. In June 1921, Dr. E.H. Helby, a medical officer from Dartmoor Prison, was killed when his motorcycle inexplicably veered into a ditch. His children, riding in the sidecar, survived and described their father fighting something they could not see. Weeks later, a coach driver reported large, hairy hands appearing on top of his own, dragging the steering wheel toward the verge. He fought them off only by wrenching with all his strength. The reports continued through the 20th century and into the 21st. In 2008, a couple driving the B3212 at dusk described their steering wheel turning sharply right, as though gripped by someone determined to send them into the ditch. They were not touching the wheel at that moment. They stopped and turned back the way they came. Dartmoor has always carried strangeness, but this road concentrates it. Whatever manifests on the B3212 predates the tarmac, predates the motorcar, predates anything we might call modern. It's simply adapted. The A616 Stocksbridge bypass in South Yorkshire should not be haunted. It was built in 1988, carved through the Don Valley to relieve traffic from the old road through the village. Fresh tarmac, modern engineering, a road with no history. Except the reports began before it even opened. During construction in September 1987, security guards patrolling the site at night reported seeing a group of children dancing in the foundations. When they approached, the children vanished. The guards, experienced men who had worked building sites across the north, refused to return after dark. In the same month, 2 police officers responding to a call about suspicious activity on the unfinished road encountered a hooded figure standing on the bridge. As they approached, it disappeared. Their official report remains in South Yorkshire Police archives. Both officers requested transfer to different divisions within weeks. Since the bypass opened, reports have not stopped. Figures have been seen at the bridge. Children have appeared in the adjacent fields where no houses stand. A monk has been reported walking the hard shoulder. Vehicles have experienced sudden electrical failures at the same spots. The bypass was cut through land that local historians warned about during planning meetings. Medieval settlements once stood here. The Church of St. Mary, demolished in the 19th century, occupied ground the road now covers. The warnings were noted and ignored. The budget could not accommodate a reroute. Now the road carries whatever was disturbed. 36 years of documentation suggest it will continue. The A666 runs from Bolton through Lancashire, through countryside that should be unremarkable except for the weight it carries. The road number alone draws attention. Locals insist the designation was deliberate, though the Department for Transport maintains it was simply the next available number in sequence when the road was classified. The route passes through Pendle Hill country, where in 1612, 12 people were arrested for witchcraft. 10 of them hanged at Lancaster Castle after a trial that documented accusations of murder by curse, of familiars summoned from shadows, of pacts signed in blood. Elizabeth Southerns, known as Demdike, Anne Whittle, known as Chattocks, their families and neighbours. Most were old, poor, and female. All were convicted on evidence that would not survive a moment in any modern court. 400 years later, the shadow persists. Accident statistics for the A666 show a rate consistently higher than comparable A roads in the region. Police traffic analysis from 2019 could not identify any infrastructure cause for the discrepancy. Drivers report figures stepping into the road who are not there when vehicles stop. Animals that appear in headlights and vanish before impact. A persistent sense of being observed on stretches where the road runs closest to Pendle Hill. The hill itself is visible for miles, watching everything. It watched the trials. It watches the traffic. The locals do not make jokes about the road number. They have lived with that hill too long. Snake Pass connects Sheffield to Manchester across the Peak District on the A57. It is one of the highest roads in England, climbing to over 1,500 feet before descending through bends that demand full attention in any weather. It is closed more often than any other A road in the country. Snow, ice, fog, flooding. The road fights back. But locals distinguish between the physical dangers and the other reports. The mist on Snake Pass behaves strangely. Drivers describe fog that arrives too quickly, too thick, in conditions that should not produce it. Within that fog, figures appear, walking the verges, standing in the road, gone when the mist clears. Some drivers report arriving at their destinations unable to account for time. A journey that should take 40 minutes has taken 2 hours. They cannot explain where the time went. They do not remember stopping. There is no mobile phone signal for much of the Snake Pass. No houses, no witnesses. If something happens, you are alone with whatever the moor provides. The mountain rescue teams who operate in this area have their own stories. They do not share them with newspapers. But among themselves, they acknowledge that this road holds more than bad weather. Scotland's A9 runs nearly the length of the country, from Falkirk to Thurso, over 270 miles of single carriageway and duelling through some of the most dramatic landscape in Britain. Long-distance lorry drivers know this road intimately. Some know it too well. The phantom hitchhiker of the A9 appears in reports spanning decades. The pattern is consistent. A driver stops for a figure at the roadside. The figure climbs into the back seat. The driver continues the journey. At some point, usually when approaching lights or another vehicle, the driver glances in the mirror. The back seat is empty. Reports concentrate around Drummochta Pass, where the road climbs to over 1,400 feet and the landscape empties of all human presence. In winter, this stretch can close for days. Even in summer, the isolation is profound. One haulier, interviewed by a Scottish newspaper in 2005, described stopping for what he believed was a stranded motorist near the Drummochta summit in February 1998. The figure sat in his cab, said nothing, and was gone by the time he reached Inverness. He stopped taking night runs on the A9 after that. The company did not argue. Are they echoes of travellers who died on this road? Warnings? Nobody knows. But truckers who work the Scottish routes have learned not to stop for anyone after dark. The B4293 near Raglan in Monmouthshire carries reports of something that predates Christianity in these islands. The black dog. Welsh folklore calls it the Gwilgi, the dog of darkness. It appears throughout the British Isles under different names: Shuck in East Anglia, Padfoot in Yorkshire. But the reports around Raglan are concentrated and consistent. The animal described is the size of a calf, with eyes that glow red or burn entirely black. It crosses the road in front of vehicles and vanishes. Those who see it report overwhelming dread, a visceral certainty that something terrible will follow. In folklore, sighting the black dog means death is coming, not necessarily for the witness, perhaps for someone they love. Modern drivers on the B4293 report the same creature their great-grandparents described, the shape moving in peripheral vision, the shadow crossing the headlights too large to be any natural animal, the terrible certainty that they were not meant to see it. Locals drive faster through certain sections. They do not explain why. The explanation would sound ridiculous to anyone who has not driven this road after dark. The A470 runs 186 miles through the heart of Wales, from Cardiff to Llandudno. It is sometimes called the spine of the country. It passes through valleys that once held communities, through landscapes shaped by industry and loss. Some stretches pass reservoirs that drowned villages. The water that English cities demanded covered farms and schools and chapels that had stood for centuries. The residents were moved. The graves were exhumed and relocated, but something remains beneath the surface. Drivers on the A470 report figures at roadsides who vanish when approached, lights in valleys where no buildings stand, sounds that should not carry through closed windows. A persistent sense of being watched by something that resents the road's presence. When water levels drop during dry summers, remnants emerge from the reservoirs. Stone walls, foundations, evidence of what was taken. The road passes through country that holds memory differently. The English built these roads. The Welsh remember what they covered. The M6 is Britain's longest motorway, running 232 miles from Rugby to the Scottish border. It was built in sections through the 1960s and the 1970s, cutting through farmland that had been worked for centuries and following routes the Romans laid down 2,000 years ago. Motorways should not be haunted. They are too new, too ordinary, too relentlessly functional. But the M6 carries reports that suggest otherwise. Near Stretton in Cheshire, drivers have reported seeing Roman soldiers marching across the carriageway. Legionnaires in formation, carrying standards, moving as though the motorway were not there. The sightings are brief. A heartbeat of impossibility in the headlights, then nothing but tarmac. Phantom trucks appear in mirrors on certain stretches and never overtake. Eddie Dawson, a lorry driver from Lancashire, stopped for a woman on the hard shoulder near Warrington in October 1974. She was distressed, asking for help. He radioed for assistance and turned back to speak to her. She had vanished. The hard shoulder was empty in both directions. The M6 follows ancient ground. The motorway engineers built on top of history, but history, it seems, has not been entirely buried. The A23 between London and Brighton passes through West Sussex countryside that looks entirely ordinary from the road. Near the village of Bolney, traffic flows past fields and woodland at the national speed limit. Nothing suggests the stretch deserves attention, but reports of a woman in white have accumulated since the 1960s. She crosses the road in front of vehicles. Drivers brake hard, but the collision they expect never comes. She is simply not there when the car stops. Some witnesses describe her face as anguished, desperate, turned toward them as though pleading. Others see only a shape, white and moving, gone too quickly to process. There is no recorded accident on this stretch that explains her presence. No young woman was killed here whose story matches the apparition. She does not correspond to any known fatality. Perhaps she predates modern records. Perhaps her story was never written down. The A23 maintains an accident rate on this stretch slightly higher than comparable sections, despite road improvements and reduced speed limits. Highways England cannot explain the statistics. Locals can. They simply know to watch the left side of the road near Bolney. Cannock Chase in Staffordshire covers 26 square miles of ancient woodland and heathland. Roads cross it, connecting the villages that cluster at its edges. After dark, some of those roads carry something that disturbs witnesses more deeply than any conventional ghost. Since the 1980s, drivers have reported children with entirely black eyes appearing at their vehicles. They approach windows. They ask for help, for rides. Witnesses describe overwhelming dread, a visceral wrongness that freezes them in place. The children do not behave like children. They speak in flat tones. They do not blink. Their eyes have no whites, no iris, nothing but black. Reports concentrate around specific roads through the chase. One incident documented in 2014 involved a woman who found a child standing beside her car when she returned from a walking trail. The child asked for help finding its mother. The woman looked away for a moment. The child was gone. Cannock Chase holds layers of history. A German military cemetery dates from the First World War. Ancient woodlands were cleared and replanted. Iron Age settlements lie long buried. Whatever manifests here wears the shape of children, but carries something older. Local families know which car parks to avoid after dark. The warnings pass from parents to children. This is not folklore anymore. Living caution. Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire is military land. It has been since the army requisitioned it for training during the First World War. The roads that cross it pass through a landscape that looks almost extraterrestrial in its emptiness. No houses, no villages, only the occasional tank crossing sign to remind you where you are. Some of these roads pass through what was once Imber. In 1943, residents were ordered to leave within 47 days, so the army could train for D-Day. They were promised they could return when the war ended. The war ended 80 years ago. They never went back. On the few days each year when the military opens the roads, visitors can drive through Imber. Stone cottages with collapsed roofs. The Church of St. Giles, maintained by volunteers. The ruins of a community that was stolen and never returned. Those who have driven these roads after dark report figures at the windows of ruined buildings. Lights in structures that have no electricity and have not had electricity for generations. Movement where no one should be. The army does not encourage civilian access. The roads are not maintained for public use. But locals who remember what Imber was, whose families were moved from these homes, still make the journey when the gates open. The land does not forget. Neither do the people. The roads through Brecfa Forest in Carmarthenshire pass through one of the largest woodlands in Wales. Commercial plantation covers much of it now, neat rows of spruce planted in the 20th century. But beneath the plantation lies older forest. The ancient woodland was here before the Norman conquest, before the Romans, before anyone kept records. Drivers on the forest roads at night report something pacing their vehicles through the trees. Not on the road, in the darkness between the trunks. Keeping pace with the car, visible only in fragments, never clearly enough to describe. Engines have cut out at the same locations, restarting only after minutes of silence. Mobile phone signal does not reach into Brecfa. The nearest help is miles away. Local farmers avoid the forest roads after sunset. They cannot articulate exactly what they are avoiding. The shape is never clear. The presence is unmistakable. Whatever watches from Brecfa is patient. It has been watching longer than the roads have existed. It will continue watching after the tarmac breaks and the forest reclaims what was planted over it. All 15 roads share something fundamental. They are transitional spaces, between places, between times, between what we understand and what we cannot explain. The A75 has more documented reports than any other road in Britain. But every road on this list carries the same message. The land remembers. Those who drive these stretches after dark are not alone. Whether you believe the explanations or not, the experiences are documented. Police reports, witness statements, patterns that repeat across decades. The warnings persist because the phenomena persist. If you have driven any of these stretches after dark, or if you know of roads in your own area that carry similar warnings, I want to hear from you. Comments from people who actually live with these roads are worth more than any archive. These roads exist whether we drive them or not. The warnings, whether spoken in pubs or passed between generations, are worth heeding. Some roads are just roads, others remember. Knowing the difference matters. The headlights swing away, the bend falls quiet again, and whatever stood at the verge does not follow. What comes next is the most unsettling place on this entire list. It is somewhere with timetables and fluorescent light, somewhere people are paid to be, and still they will not stay until the last train pulls out. Station masters report the phenomenon across dozens of platforms. The worst hour is always the one after the final board goes dark, and the echoes start in the empty corridors. Cleaners refuse the work. Ticket office staff volunteer for morning shifts instead. Security footage from some stations shows no explanation for the cold spots on the platforms at 3 in the morning. These are places where the dread runs deeper than any road ever could. Let us begin in the far north of England, in the border city of Carlisle. Carlisle Citadel is a Grade 2 star listed station on the West Coast Main Line, roughly 102 miles southeast of Glasgow and 299 miles north of London Euston. It was designed by the architect William Tite in a neo-Tudor style and opened in September 1847. The sandstone facade is imposing. 2 stories of multi-bay windows capped with slate roofs at different levels. At its peak, 7 separate railway companies operated out of this one station. The London and North Western, the Midland, the Caledonian, the North British, each with their own booking offices and parcels rooms. It was built to be a cathedral of Victorian engineering and commerce. From the outside, it looks like a place you would trust. Solid, permanent. The kind of building the Victorians put up to say we are here and we are staying. But the station was built on land that locals had long called the fever pit. Slum clearance ground. Ground where the sick and the desperate had lived and died before the railways arrived. That history is in the foundations. And beneath the platforms, running for several acres, is the undercroft. A sprawling network of tunnels, passageways, service rooms, and staff quarters constructed in 1847 and largely unchanged since. The undercroft once housed a paraffin lamp store, staff sleeping quarters, and a butcher's room, complete with iron hooks still fixed into the ceiling for hanging meat and stone drainage gullies in the floor for blood. You can still see them today. The reports from this station span decades, and they are remarkably specific. The Cumberland News, the local newspaper, documented several entities seen at the station over the years. A headless man on platform 8, a woman wearing a veil who moves along corridors in the undercroft, a shadowy figure who appears on the platform and points downward toward the tunnels below, then vanishes, a small boy accompanied by a dog. These are not vague impressions. These are described by multiple witnesses across different years. Stuart Davidson, who served as customer experience manager, gave testimony that is difficult to dismiss. He described seeing 2 men's faces and a little boy with a dog appearing in a red mist inside the Undercroft tunnels. He reported being kicked by a seemingly invisible person. He described hearing voices he could not explain. Station manager Sue Howarth confirmed multiple apparitions to Darren Ritson, author of Haunted Carlisle. She listed the specific entities: the small boy with the dog, a shadowy figure standing on the platform during a blizzard, the veiled woman, the headless man, all documented, all reported independently by different members of staff across different periods. In 2014, Virgin Trains took a step that no railway operator had taken before. They hired Barry Guy, founder of the Ghost Finder Paranormal Society, as an official paranormal consultant. He was equipped with electromagnetic field detectors and thermal imaging cameras. The company framed this as responding to customer feedback. Steve Tennant, the customer experience director, said they wanted to ensure that staff never felt uncomfortable at work, even if it was caused by paranormal activity. That is a corporate press release acknowledging ghosts in the workplace. The station still runs ghost tours through the Undercroft. They sell out regularly. The staff who work the late shifts do not attend them. They already know what is down there. That was a station whose management hired a ghost hunter to calm the workforce. The next station had its own manager go on record telling people to stay away from parts of her building. Crewe Station in Cheshire opened in 1837. It is one of the oldest and most historically significant railway junctions in the world. The town of Crewe was essentially built around this station. Everything radiated outward from the tracks: the locomotive works, the workers' terraces, the pubs where the signalmen drank after their shifts. Walk through Crewe today and you can still feel the railway's influence on every street. Nearly 200 years of continuous railway operation have passed through this junction. 200 years of shift changes and signal checks and late-night platforms where staff walk alone with nothing but their footsteps and the wind coming off the tracks. Queen Victoria is rumoured to have had a secret tunnel beneath the station, accessed through a private lift in the North Subway. The tunnel has never been conclusively confirmed or denied. But it is the North Subway itself that concerns us. Sheila Breeze served as station manager at Crewe. She went on record with advice that is startling coming from a person whose job was to manage a public building. She said she would advise against going to the North Subway. That is where the lift shaft is, the one rumoured to have been used by Queen Victoria. She said there is definitely something down there. Braver people than her had taken pictures and short videos, but they never stayed long. They always ran back up the stairs with a look of panic in their eyes. She described the area as not for the faint-hearted. This is not a ghost hunter speaking. This is the station manager. Throughout the station's nearly 200-year history, staff have reported the patter of children's footsteps in empty corridors. A phantom cat has been seen prowling the platforms after the last train has departed. There is a persistent and general feeling of unease in the North Subway that veteran workers say has nothing to do with drafts or poor lighting. Ghostly footprints have appeared in the ticket office with no explanation offered. The reports were so frequent and so widespread that for a time the station ran ghost tours, not as a marketing gimmick, but as a way of acknowledging openly what staff had been saying for decades. When Virgin Trains conducted an internal survey of their West Coast mainline staff, asking which stations they found most unsettling, Crewe came second, beaten only by Carlisle. This was not a poll conducted by paranormal investigators or a television program. It was workplace feedback from the people who actually lock up these buildings at night, the people who walk the platforms alone after the passengers have gone. They were asked where they felt most uneasy, and Crewe was their answer. Children's footsteps and phantom cats are unnerving. They make you uneasy. They make you check over your shoulder. But what happened inside the next tunnel is something else entirely. This is where the story turns from the unexplained to the historically documented, from whispers to screams, from ghosts to the event that may have created them. The Clayton Tunnel sits between Hassocks and Preston Park in East Sussex, on the London to Brighton line. The tunnel was built in 1841, carved through the chalk of the South Downs, because the hills would not move for the railway. It stretches for over a mile beneath the rolling green downland that walkers and cyclists enjoy on summer afternoons, without knowing what lies below. The northern entrance is one of the most visually extraordinary pieces of railway architecture in England. A Gothic portal with a castle-like cottage sitting directly on top, complete with ornate turrets and battlements rising from the chalk cutting. If you approach it from the footpath above, you see this strange medieval fantasy perched above the dark mouth of a tunnel with trains emerging from beneath it into the daylight. It looks like something from a Victorian fever dream. But the story of this tunnel is no fairy tale. On Sunday, the 25th of August, 1861, signalman Henry Killick was stationed in his cabin near the southern entrance. He controlled an alarm bell linked to a signal and a needle telegraph connecting him to the signal box at the northern end. His job was to ensure that trains entering the tunnel from the south were properly spaced. The regulation required at least 5 minutes between trains on the same track. Killick had been on duty for 24 continuous hours, not the regulation 18 hours, but 24. He needed to work through the full day to earn a single day off. 3 northbound trains left Brighton Station within 7 minutes of one another. As the first train passed, the automatic signal failed to return from clear to danger. The second train entered the tunnel. Killick grabbed his red flag and waved it desperately, but he believed the driver had not seen it. The driver of the second train had in fact glimpsed the flag and stopped his train inside the tunnel, but Killick did not know this. A telegraph message then arrived from the northern signal box saying "line clear." It referred to the first train, which had exited safely. Killick interpreted it as confirmation that both trains had cleared the tunnel. He signaled the third train to proceed. Then the third train entered the tunnel at speed and collided with the stationary second train. The impact obliterated the guard van and the rear carriage. The chimney collapsed. Passengers in the final carriage were burned alive. 23 people died. 176 were injured. At the time, it was the worst railway disaster in British history. The subsequent inquiry by Captain Tyler found that the signalling system was fundamentally inadequate. He also stated that it was disgraceful that a man in so responsible a position as signalman Killick should be compelled to work for 24 hours at a stretch in order to earn 1 day of rest a week. Killick was cleared of blame. The systems had failed, not the man. The disaster led directly to the adoption of the block system across British railways, replacing the dangerous time interval system that had allowed 3 trains onto the same stretch of track. Charles Dickens almost certainly based his ghost story The Signalman on this disaster. Published in 1866 in the Christmas edition of All the Year Round, the story features a lonely signalman haunted by an apparition at the mouth of a tunnel. The ghost appears before each tragedy, waving frantically and covering its face. The signalman is tormented by warnings he can see but cannot act upon. Dickens himself had survived the Staplehurst rail crash in Kent only a year before writing it, an accident that killed 10 people and left him unable to speak for 2 weeks. Readers in 1866 would have recognized the Clayton Tunnel immediately. The story remains one of the finest ghost stories in the English language. In 1976, the BBC adapted it for their Ghost Story for Christmas series, starring Denham Elliott in a performance that is still discussed today. What persists at Clayton is harder to explain. For over a century and a half, people have reported moans and howls emanating from the tunnel and the sound of scraping metal when no train is present or approaching. A figure has been seen near the sealed entrance by the ventilation shaft. Workers who know the tunnel's history have given this apparition a name. They call him Charlie. In 2011, 4 night shift workers heard the cries of a woman coming from inside the nearby box tunnel on the same line. The cries grew louder, then faded. A woman in a nightdress appeared and vanished before their eyes. When they reported it, they were told that the same figure had been seen before by a separate group of 6 men. Henry Killick survived the disaster. He was cleared of blame. The systems had failed, not the man. But he had been awake for 24 hours when 23 people died in the tunnel he was responsible for. The inquiry recommended that no signalman should ever be required to work such shifts again. Whether that recommendation was followed immediately is less clear in the record. The tunnel still operates today. The signals still work. The shift patterns have long since improved. Modern trains pass through Clayton every day, carrying passengers between London and Brighton, most of them unaware of what happened in the darkness beneath the Downs on that August Sunday in 1861. But the sounds, according to those who work the line, have not stopped. The moaning, the scraping, the sense that something in the tunnel remembers what the passengers have forgotten. We have been speaking about ghosts, the unexplained, the atmospheric, things seen in mist and heard in empty tunnels, apparitions with names and histories. Now we come to a station where the disturbance has a different source entirely. Not supernatural, but archaeological. A place where the railway was built not on bad ground, but on the dead themselves. Liverpool Street is one of the busiest stations in London. Hundreds of thousands of passengers cross its concourse every day. Commuters, tourists, families heading for the Elizabeth line. The station hums with life from early morning until late at night. It does not feel like a place where the dead would linger. But beneath the feet of every person tapping their Oyster card lies the new churchyard, also known as the Bedlam Burial Ground. Established in 1569, it was London's first municipal burial ground, unaffiliated with any church. It received the bodies of those too poor for churchyard burial, patients from the nearby Bethlehem Hospital for the Mentally Ill, the institution that gave us the word Bedlam, and across multiple outbreaks spanning 2 centuries, plague victims. An estimated 30,000 people were buried in this small plot of land between 1569 and 1738. When the original Broad Street station was constructed in the 1860s, workmen unearthed what contemporary accounts described as the mouldering bones of several hundred human bodies. The remains were first scattered about in the most indecent manner before being partly reinterred in one pit and partly carted away. The Victorians built their station and carried on. Then, Crossrail arrived. Between 2011 and 2015, archaeologists from the Museum of London Archaeology conducted the largest archaeological study of London's population from the 16th to 18th centuries. 60 archaeologists worked in shifts, 6 days a week, carefully removing layer after layer of London's forgotten dead. They carefully excavated over 3,500 skeletons. Among them, the team found something that stopped the dig: a mass burial pit. Approximately 42 bodies placed in thin wooden coffins, all buried on the same day. A headstone found nearby was marked 1665, the year of the Great Plague, the year when 1 in 5 Londoners died, and the living could not bury the dead fast enough. Scientists at the Max Planck Institute in Germany extracted DNA from the teeth of 20 of the 42 skeletons. 5 samples contained traces of Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium. These were the first examples of 17th century plague DNA ever recovered in Britain. The coffins had collapsed and rotted over the centuries, giving the appearance of a slumped and distorted mass grave. The bodies had been there for 350 years, undisturbed, while London grew and changed and forgot above them. Staff working night shifts at Liverpool Street have reported a man in overalls pacing the platforms. He appears on CCTV monitors clearly enough to send a colleague to investigate. When the colleague arrives, no one is there. Passengers waiting for late trains have reported strange figures at the edges of their vision. Workers describe an atmospheric weight in certain areas of the station that they discuss carefully and in measured language, the kind of language people use when they do not want to be thought credulous but cannot quite deny what they have felt. 30,000 bodies, plague victims, paupers, the mentally ill, the forgotten. Every commuter who passes through Liverpool Street walks above them. The excavations are complete now. The Elizabeth Line entrance is open. The dead have been studied and their stories partly told. But the station sits where it sits. You cannot move a terminus. You cannot move 30,000 graves. So they share the ground, the living and the dead, and the trains run on time above them. Liverpool Street is haunted by the ancient dead. The last station on our list is haunted by something more recent and far harder to discuss. Birmingham New Street is the busiest interchange station outside London. Over 40 million passenger journeys pass through it every year. The station has been rebuilt twice. The original opened in 1854. The brutalist concrete box that replaced it in the 1960s was widely considered one of the ugliest buildings in Britain. The current building, completed in 2015 at a cost of over £600 million, is gleaming glass and steel, with a vast atrium flooding the concourse with natural light. It is modern. It is bright. It does not look haunted. It does not feel like a place where the past would linger. The architects who redesigned it wanted passengers to feel welcome and safe. They succeeded mostly. During the day, the station feels like any other busy modern transport hub. Shops and coffee chains and electronic departure boards. Normal, busy, alive. But Platform 4 has a reputation that no amount of architectural renewal has shifted. No amount of glass and steel and natural light has changed what staff report happening there after dark. Throughout the station's more than 160 years of history, 4 people have taken their own lives on Platform 4. All 4. The same platform, not platform 3, not platform 5. 4 separate individuals, across different decades, chose the same stretch of concrete and rail. Their ghosts are said to appear late at night when the concourse has emptied and the last announcements have been made. The most identified is Walter Hartles, a retired train driver who shot himself on the platform. Another is known only as Claude, described as a Victorian man who is said to have poisoned himself there. The identities of the other 2 have never been confirmed. Staff have reported seeing figures standing on platform 4 in the dead hours between the last departure and the first arrival. Figures who are present and then simply are not. One moment standing, the next moment gone. No sound, no movement, just absence where there had been a shape. In 2014, Chiltern Railways took a step that made national news. They appointed Nick Rees as the station's supernatural liaison officer. This was not a joke. This was not a Halloween promotion. Rees was given genuine responsibility for handling reports from staff and passengers about unexplained occurrences. He described doors slamming by themselves in empty corridors, electrical equipment switching on and off without cause, a disused basement beneath platform 3, where multiple staff members independently reported that the atmosphere was wrong, that something about the space made them want to leave immediately, regardless of what task had brought them there. Rees also said something that has stayed with me. He said, carefully, that he did not believe the spirits at New Street were malicious. He described them as nice ghosts, which is either the most reassuring thing anyone has ever said about a railway station or the most unsettling. I have not decided which. Platform 4 is still there. The trains still arrive. The passengers still board and alight and check their phones and drink their coffees without a second thought. And if you find yourself waiting there late on a winter evening, when the concourse has emptied and the departure board has gone dark, and the only sound is the hum of strip lighting and the distant rumble of a train that might be coming or might have already gone, you may notice that you are not entirely alone. Whether you choose to look is your business. The last train pulls out and the platform empties of the living, the indicator board blinking to nothing above an empty bench. Nothing moves on the rails below. But the night does not end at the surface. From the open air we go downward now, into the tunnels beneath the city, into the deep stations where the workers refuse to be alone long after the trains have stopped running. The air down there sits cold and still. Commuters report the same unsettled feeling at certain stops, the sense of being watched from the darkness between the platforms. The tiled walls carry whispers that have no source. Workers have left shift notes describing a presence that moves with them through the corridors. Staff will not work without someone beside them. They have stopped saying why. The silence down there keeps its own counsel. We begin at Elephant and Castle, southern terminus of the Bakerloo line, opened in 1890 as one of the original deep-level tube stations. If you have travelled through London with any regularity, you have almost certainly passed through here. During the day, it handles thousands of commuters. Busy, noisy, unremarkable. After hours, the station changes. Cleaning contractors working the night shift have reported footsteps on empty platforms. Distinct, measured, following behind them along corridors where they can see nobody at all. In 2019, a contractor refused to complete his shift alone. The reason cited in his incident report was that he felt a presence in the connecting tunnel. Not threatening exactly, just wrong. The feeling of being watched by someone who was not there. Historians have noted that this station was built through an area with documented plague burial sites from the 17th century. The construction crews in 1890 would have dug straight through them, but Elephant and Castle is merely atmospheric. What happens at our next station has made grown men refuse to enter certain rooms. Highgate sits on the Northern Line in North London. It opened in 1941 during wartime when construction continued despite bombs falling overhead. The station itself is functional and modern enough. What gives Highgate its reputation is what surrounds it. Highgate Cemetery lies nearby, Victorian London's famous burial ground where the legend of the Highgate vampire emerged in the 1970s. Reports describe a tall, dark figure gliding between the tombs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. The underground station has developed its own mythology, which seems connected. Staff reports focus on the disused tunnels and abandoned platforms of the Northern Heights extension. This was an ambitious project that was never completed. The tunnels exist, but no trains run through them. Only maintenance crews enter, and only when absolutely necessary. A 2017 infrastructure survey documented temperature anomalies in these passages. Specific areas were significantly colder than the surrounding tunnels, with no engineering explanation. Station handover logs repeatedly note the atmosphere in these sections, not in any official capacity, just handwritten comments from workers warning colleagues about what to expect. Highgate has legends to explain its reputation. Our next station has something far more specific and far more violent. Farringdon holds a unique place in railway history. Opened in 1863, it was literally the first underground station in the world. The Metropolitan line ran from here. Every underground system on Earth descends from what was built beneath these streets. 161 years of continuous operation. But the history goes back further than the railway. Staff at Farringdon have reported screaming, not the screaming of passengers or the shriek of train brakes. Something else entirely. A woman's voice. Sometimes a young woman. Sometimes almost a child. The screams come in the early morning hours when the station is empty and echo through passages where there is nobody to make them. Local historians believe they know the source. Anne Naylor, a 13-year-old girl apprenticed to a hat maker in the 1750s. Her employer murdered her in 1758. The court records survive in the London Metropolitan Archives. Her body was disposed of in the Farringdon area. When they built the underground a century later, they built it through the ground where Anne Naylor was buried, without ceremony or marker. A 2021 staff incident report referenced an unexplained audio disturbance in the early hours. The worker who filed it had been at Farringdon for 12 years. He had never filed an incident report before. Anne Naylor's story is tragic, but she was one victim. What lies beneath our next station involves thousands. Liverpool Street is one of the busiest stations in London. It handles national rail services and underground connections. The Elizabeth line runs through it on its way to Heathrow. Hundreds of thousands of passengers walk through a space built directly over the dead every day. The Bethlehem Royal Hospital stood here once, known commonly as Bedlam. For centuries, the hospital housed those judged to be mentally ill. Many of them died within its walls. When they died, they were buried on the grounds without ceremony. Poor souls who had already been forgotten by the world simply vanished into the earth. When Crossrail construction began in 2015, workers started finding bones. By the time the excavation finished in 2017, the Museum of London Archaeology had documented over 3,000 skeletons beneath the station. 3,000 people. Buried. Forgotten. Now with trains running through them every few minutes. The archaeological reports noted challenging site conditions. Workers described unease they could not explain. A wrongness in the lower passages made experienced construction crews want to finish quickly and get out. A maintenance worker writing on a railway forum in 2019 described the feeling in specific terms. It was not fear exactly. It was the sense that you were intruding somewhere you did not belong, that something knew you were there and wanted you gone. Liverpool Street disturbs because of what is beneath. Our next station disturbs because of what people see again and again in the same location, wearing the same clothes. Covent Garden opened in 1907 on the Piccadilly line. It serves the theatre district, the Opera House, and the Market Square with its street performers. Millions of tourists visit the area every year, and many of them take the tube. Most of them have no idea what waits on the platform. His name was William Terrace, a Victorian actor, handsome, popular, the leading man of his era. In 1897, he was murdered outside the Adelphi Theatre by a jealous colleague. He was stabbed to death on the pavement just yards from where the station would be built 10 years later. Terrace had been a regular customer at a bakery that stood on the site before the underground arrived. He walked these streets daily, and according to decades of staff reports, he never stopped. The sightings follow a pattern. A gentleman in old-fashioned clothing, Victorian dress, a distressed expression on his face. He appears on the platform or in the passages. He walks a few steps, and then he is simply not there anymore. In 1955, a ticket collector formally reported the sighting. He described the figure in detail, the clothing, the apparent age, the look of confused distress. Exactly the same description other staff members would give in the decades that followed. New workers at Covent Garden are warned about the actor. Not officially, of course, but the knowledge passes from one generation of staff to the next. You might see him. Do not be alarmed. He has never harmed anyone. He simply walks through the station that was built on the ground he once knew, looking perhaps for the theatre he never reached. William Terrace is seen. What happens at our next station is heard. And once you know the history, you will understand why the sounds are so disturbing. The Bank and Monument complex is vast. A warren of tunnels and passages connects multiple lines beneath the financial heart of London. Parts of it date back to 1900. The corridors seem to go on forever. Easy to get lost, even if you work there. Even easier to feel that you are not alone. Her name was Sarah Whitehead. In 1811, her brother Philip was executed for forgery. He had worked at the Bank of England. When they hanged him for his crime, Sarah lost her mind. For the next 25 years, she appeared at the bank every single day, dressed in black, asking for her brother. Where is Philip? Is Philip here today? When will Philip return? She asked those questions every day for a quarter century, until she died, still looking for the brother who would never come home. The Bank of England staff called her the Black Nun. The nickname has survived for over 200 years, so apparently has she. Staff sightings concentrate in the tunnels that run between Bank and Monument. A woman in black. Not walking exactly, gliding. Her feet do not seem to touch the ground. She passes through the corridors as if searching for something. Then she is gone. Transport for London maintenance staff have named the phenomenon in internal communications. She has a designation, a place in the informal records that staff keep among themselves. The Black Nun still walks beneath the bank where her brother worked, still searching, still dressed in mourning. The Black Nun lost her mind from grief. What happened at our next station broke an entire community. And some say the grief never left. Bethnal Green, Central Line, East London. The station opened in 1946, but the tragedy happened before any train ever ran through it. On the 3rd of March 1943, the station was being used as an air raid shelter. The platforms had not yet seen passengers. They had seen families, children, people hiding from the bombs that fell on London night after night. At 8:17 in the evening, the air raid sirens sounded. People rushed toward the shelter entrance. The steps were wet. Someone at the front tripped. The crowd behind kept pushing. They did not know what was happening ahead. They only knew they needed to get underground. Within 15 seconds, 173 people were dead. 62 of them children. Crushed. Suffocated. Compressed against each other on the stairs with no room to breathe. The worst civilian disaster of the Second World War in Britain. It happened in seconds. And then it was over. The authorities covered it up. Wartime morale could not handle the truth. The full story did not emerge for decades. A memorial was finally erected in 2017, 74 years after the children died on those steps. The station was built anyway. Trains run through it every day, and staff members hear things. The sounds of children crying, panic, screaming that comes from nowhere and stops without explanation. A driver in 2018 described sounds of distress on an empty platform. He filed a report. He was not the first. He will not be the last. Some staff members refuse night shifts at Bethnal Green. They do not elaborate on why. They simply will not work there alone after dark. Above them on street level stands the memorial. Below them in the tunnels, the sounds continue. 173 people, 62 children. The grief that never left. Bethnal Green is tragedy made manifest. Our next station has no single tragedy. Instead, it has something that should not exist at all. The British Museum station closed in 1933, but the tunnels remain, sealed, dark, empty for 90 years beneath Russell Square. When the station was operating, passengers noticed something unusual, an atmosphere, a feeling of being watched. The proximity to the Egyptian collections in the museum above sparked immediate speculation. The mummy's curse, ancient spirits disturbed by Victorian archaeologists who brought them across the world to display in glass cases. Newspaper reports from the 1930s documented the legend. The ghost of an Egyptian princess was said to walk the platforms. In 1935, a film called Bulldog Jack featured the station and invented a secret tunnel connecting it to the museum. The tunnel did not exist, but the legend persisted. Staff working nearby Holborn report anomalies in connecting passages, the sense of being watched. Footsteps that follow but produce no figure when you turn around. The platforms of the British Museum station are inaccessible. Whatever walks there now has no witnesses. Why did they close a station at a major tourist destination? The official explanation involves low passenger numbers and nearby alternatives. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps there were other reasons that never made it into the official record. The British Museum station is closed. You cannot visit. Our next station is very much open in a sense, and what happens there happens in front of witnesses. Aldwych closed in 1994. The last train departed in December of that year. But unlike most abandoned stations, Aldwych has been preserved. Film crews use it regularly for period dramas, thrillers, and horror films. The station looks almost exactly as it did when passengers still walked its platforms. Frozen in time, waiting. During the war, Aldwych sheltered treasures from the British Museum. Priceless artifacts were hidden underground while bombs fell overhead. The station has always had a connection to objects of great age and uncertain provenance. Perhaps something came with them. Perhaps something was there already. Film crews have documented refusals to work alone in certain areas. Professional crews, experienced technicians who have worked on sets around the world, say something about Aldwych makes them uncomfortable. A television investigation in 2002 reportedly captured electronic voice phenomena in the empty ticket hall. Sounds that should not have been there. Words that nobody spoke. Transport for London staff accompanying film crews follow formal protocols about lone working. The disused ticket hall produces the most reports. A presence that does not want you there. Not aggressive, simply unwelcome. As if you have entered someone's home uninvited and they are waiting for you to realize your mistake and leave. Aldwych is disturbing because it is frozen. Our final station is disturbing because it never stopped. And what happens there has never been explained. Kennington has operated on the Northern Line since 1890, 134 years. It is a major interchange, a reversing point where trains turn around to head back north. Completely ordinary, completely routine. Except that staff have refused to work alone there for decades. The incidents concentrate in the reversing sidings, the tunnels where trains turn around. Empty trains, no passengers, just the driver, and whatever else might be in the tunnel with them. Drivers have described figures on the track, shapes that appear in the headlights, human forms standing where no human should be. When the train approaches, they do not move. They simply vanish. Gone before the train reaches them. Gone before the driver can stop. The station has a history of multiple fatalities over its 134-year operation. People falling, people jumping. The trains cannot always stop in time. These tragedies leave marks. Perhaps some of those marks are not merely historical. Railway union discussions have referenced lone working policies at Kennington. Testimonials appear on railway forums. Staff members describe footsteps following them through empty connecting tunnels. The sound of breathing in passages where they can see no one. The absolute certainty that someone is behind them. The absolute emptiness when they turn around. The phenomena continue. This is not historical curiosity. This is not Victorian legend. This is now. Tonight. Right now, as you listen to this, someone is working a late shift at Kennington Station, walking those corridors alone, listening to the silence, and hoping the silence is all they hear. The escalator stands still. The tiled corridor holds its own echo, and the cold down there has nothing to do with weather. But come back up to the surface now, because the next places are not single buildings or platforms. They are whole settlements that turn wrong after dark. The houses are lit. The curtains are drawn. The streets between them fall silent in a way that streets should not fall silent. Nothing moves on them. No cats. No foxes. No wind that would explain the sound the gate makes. Residents report that time feels different after sundown, that the walk to the shop takes longer than it should. The village itself becomes a presence, aware and unwelcoming to those who linger after the light fails.
Let us begin with a village that has leaned into its reputation so completely that it now appears in official tourism literature. Pluckley in Kent. Population around 1,200. It sits roughly 15 miles from Ashford, in the Weald of Kent, surrounded by orchards and farmland. Drive through on a summer afternoon and you will see nothing but a pretty English village. Drive through after dark, and locals will tell you that you might see considerably more. Pluckley holds an unofficial record as the most haunted village in England, with 12 documented ghosts in parish records and local testimony. The screaming woods near the village have become notorious. Visitors report hearing shrieks with no source. Dogs refuse to enter certain clearings. The specific ghosts are named and located with surprising precision. The Red Lady haunts the churchyard of St. Nicholas, said to be Lady Daring searching for her stillborn baby buried somewhere in the grounds. The White Lady appears in the ruined chapel at the Daring estate. A schoolmaster hangs perpetually from a tree near the playing fields. A highwayman meets his end repeatedly at a crossroads locals call Fright Corner. What strikes researchers is the consistency across centuries. The publican at the Black Horse has worked there for over 30 years. He does not claim to have seen anything himself, but he has collected testimonies from staff members who refused to close alone. Glasses found smashed in locked rooms, cold spots that move, the smell of tobacco in areas where nobody has smoked for decades. When asked if he believes, he simply says that he keeps the lights on. Travelling northwest to Gloucestershire, we find Prestbury, which disputes Pluckley's claim to the title. This village of around 3,000 residents on the outskirts of Cheltenham may be home to more documented apparitions per square mile than anywhere else in the country. The Black Abbot has been seen walking through the walls of Reform Cottage, following the line of a medieval path that no longer exists above ground. A medieval messenger on horseback gallops through Burgage near the old boundary of the Bishop's Palace. Residents who have lived there for generations describe a curious phenomenon. The apparitions are most often seen by newcomers, as if the ghosts show themselves to those who have not yet learned to look away. Long-term residents report a strange accommodation with the village's reputation. You stop noticing the cold spots. You stop questioning why your dog will not walk down certain lanes. You simply adjust. Heading further north into the Yorkshire wolds, we reach something altogether different. Warham Percy is not a living village with residents who might warn you away. It is a deserted medieval settlement, empty since the early 1500s, now managed by English heritage. Stone foundations mark where over 40 houses once stood. The Church of St. Martin remains partially intact, its walls open to the sky. What makes Warham Percy genuinely unsettling emerged from archaeological excavations published in academic journals. Researchers found evidence that medieval villagers mutilated bodies after death. Bones showed signs of deliberate breakage, burning, and decapitation. Academic interpretation suggests these were practices to prevent the dead from walking, the phenomenon medieval people called revenants. The villagers were afraid of their own dead. Farming communities in the surrounding area tell their children to stay away after sunset. Locals cannot articulate exactly why. The practice simply passes down. On the Suffolk coast, we find a village that is still disappearing. Dunwich was once one of the largest ports in medieval England. In the 13th century, it rivaled London in size and importance. 8 churches, 3 chapels, hospitals, monasteries, and a thriving population of over 3,000. Today, the population stands at around 120, and most of medieval Dunwich lies beneath the North Sea. Coastal erosion has been claiming the village for 8 centuries. Storm surges in 1287 and 1328 destroyed much of the original town. The process continues. Each year, a little more falls into the water. What draws attention is what locals and visitors report hearing during storms. The sound of church bells ringing from beneath the waves. Marine archaeologists have mapped the submerged ruins. They have located the foundations of churches on the seabed. Whether bells could physically ring under those conditions is another question. But the reports persist across centuries, documented in parish records going back to the 1600s. Fishermen who work these waters simply accept it. They hear the bells. They do not discuss it further. In Derbyshire, the village of Ireham presents a different kind of haunting. In 1665, a bundle of cloth arrived from London carrying fleas infected with bubonic plague. Within a year, at least 260 of the village's 350 residents were dead. What makes Ireham remarkable is not the death toll, but the decision made by villagers and their rector, William Mompesson. They quarantined themselves, establishing a boundary no one would cross, and preventing the plague from spreading to neighboring communities. Boundary stones still mark the perimeter. Holes carved in them held coins soaked in vinegar, the payment for food left by outsiders who would not enter. The Riley graves on a hillside outside the village tell the worst of it. Elizabeth Hancock buried 6 of her children and her husband within 8 days in August 1666, digging the graves herself because no one else remained to help. The village commemorates this sacrifice annually, but locals express complicated feelings about visitors who treat the graves as tourist attractions. There is a difference between remembering sacrifice and consuming tragedy as entertainment. The parish church still holds records of every death. The names remain. When you walk the village, you walk among ghosts of a different kind, not supernatural, but historical. People who chose to die rather than spread death. Now we must shift to something harder. Places where the darkness comes not from ghosts or plague, but from what was done to communities and to the land itself. Aberfan in South Wales. On October 21st, 1966, at approximately 9:15 in the morning, a colliery spoil tip on the hillside above the village collapsed. 140,000 tons of mining debris flowed down onto Pantglas Junior School. The children had just returned from assembly. 116 children died. 28 adults died. An entire generation of a village was taken in minutes. The Aberfan disaster remains one of the worst industrial tragedies in British history. The tribunal that followed found the National Coal Board entirely responsible. The tips had been built on springs, and warnings had been ignored for years. The memorial garden that now occupies the site where the school stood is maintained with extraordinary care. Rows of arched headstones mark children buried together because families wanted them to remain with their classmates. The village has made its wishes clear about visitors. This is not entertainment. The memorial may be visited respectfully and quietly. Photographs of the graves are discouraged. Survivors still live in Aberfan. They buried their children and their friends. When people ask locals about visiting, the response is measured. Come if you want to understand. Do not come if you want to gawk. The difference matters. In Wiltshire, we find a village that was stolen by the government and never returned. Imber sits on Salisbury Plain, accessible only on specific days each year when the military opens the roads. In 1943, the War Office requisitioned the village for training exercises. Residents were given 47 days to leave. They were promised they could return when the war ended. The war ended 80 years ago. They never went back. The Church of St. Giles still stands, maintained by volunteers. The surrounding buildings are ruins used for urban warfare training. Bullet holes pock the walls. Roofs have collapsed. The village pub, the school, the farms where families lived for generations, all abandoned and decaying while descendants petition for rights that are never granted. On the days when Imber is open to the public, you can walk streets that stopped being lived in within living memory. Some who make the pilgrimage are descendants of original residents. They walk through what remains of their family homes. They cannot stay. Tyneham in Dorset tells a nearly identical story. In 1943, residents received orders to evacuate in preparation for D-Day training exercises. The note left on the church door has become famous. Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes where many of us have lived for generations to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day, and thank you for treating the village kindly. They did not return. The village remains in military hands. The church and schoolhouse have been preserved as a museum. The rest slowly crumbles. The phone box still stands. The post office sign remains. But no letters have been posted for over 80 years. The village is frozen in 1943, waiting for residents who grew old elsewhere and whose grandchildren now visit a village they have never been allowed to call home. Far to the northwest, beyond the Scottish mainland, lies the archipelago of St. Kilda. This is the most remote part of the British Isles, 40 miles west of the Outer Hebrides. In 1930, the remaining 36 residents requested evacuation. They could no longer sustain their community. The population had been declining for decades. The specific hardships of St. Kilda defy easy description. A condition called the 8-day sickness killed most newborns, likely tetanus from the traditional practice of treating umbilical cords with fulmar oil. The boat cold struck virtually every islander whenever a ship arrived from the mainland, suggesting their immune systems had no exposure to common infections. Winter storms could cut them off entirely for months. What remains on St. Kilda are stone houses called black houses, their roofs fallen in but walls intact. Stone clates where seabirds were stored dot the hillsides by the hundreds. The Ministry of Defence now operates a tracking station there, staffed by contractors who rotate in and out. The village street is empty. The church stands roofless. When visitors arrive by boat, they walk through a community that chose to leave because survival had become too hard. The silence is profound. Even the seabirds seem quieter than they should be. In Orkney, Skara Brae offers a different kind of emptiness. This is not a village abandoned in living memory, but a settlement older than the pyramids. Stone houses, preserved under sand for over 4,000 years, were exposed by a great storm in 1850. The furniture remains: stone beds, stone dressers, stone seats arranged around central hearths. The passages between houses are intact. What happened to the people of Skara Brae is unknown. They simply left, or they simply ended. Archaeological evidence suggests the departure was not sudden. They took time to bury objects and to prepare. But where they went, or what drove them away, remains a mystery. Standing in those houses, you are surrounded by domestic details of lives that ended before Stonehenge was completed. The intimacy is unsettling. These were homes. Whatever ended them left no explanation. On the Devon coast, the ruins of Hulsons emerge at low tide like bones from the sea. This was a fishing village of over 120 residents at the turn of the 20th century. Then the dredgers came. Between 1897 and 1902, the Admiralty authorized extensive dredging of the offshore shingle bank to supply material for expanding Devonport dockyard. Despite warnings from villagers and from engineers, 650,000 tons of material were removed. The protective shingle beach dropped dramatically, and storm damage accelerated. By 1917, a single storm destroyed most of the remaining houses. The last resident, Elizabeth Pretterjohn, remained until her death in 1964, living in a cottage above the ruins. Today you can visit the viewing platform and look down at collapsed walls and empty windows where families once lived. The pub, the reading room, the chapel. All destroyed so that ships could be built elsewhere. Locals in the nearby village of Beesons point to Hulsons as a reminder. The sea takes what it wants. Humans should not help it. In North Wales, beneath the waters of Llyn Selyn Reservoir, lies the village of Capel Selyn. In 1957, Liverpool Corporation received parliamentary approval to flood the valley, despite unanimous opposition from Welsh members of Parliament. 67 residents were displaced. A post office, a school, a chapel, and 12 farms were demolished. Graves were exhumed and the bodies relocated. The valley was flooded in 1965. When water levels drop during dry periods, remnants of the village emerge. Stone walls, foundations, evidence of the community that existed before Liverpool needed water. The drowning of Capel Selyn became a defining moment in Welsh national consciousness. It demonstrated that Welsh communities could be destroyed by English cities without Welsh consent. The bitterness has not faded. If you ask locals about visiting the reservoir, some will welcome you. Others will tell you that you are standing on stolen land, drinking stolen water. Both responses are accurate. We come now to places where darkness takes human form. Pendle, in Lancashire. In 1612, 12 people from the villages around Pendle Hill were accused of witchcraft. 10 were hanged at Lancaster Castle. The trials were thoroughly documented by the clerk of the court, Thomas Potts, whose account, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, remains in print 4 centuries later. The accused were mostly poor, elderly, and female. Among them were Elizabeth Southerns, known as Demdike, and Anne Whittle, known as Chattox, along with their families and associates. The specific accusations included murder by witchcraft, causing illness, and making a pact with the devil. The evidence would not survive scrutiny in any modern court. Confessions were obtained through exhaustion and manipulation. Witnesses were children and rivals with grudges. Pendle Hill still dominates the landscape, visible for miles. The villages where the accused lived remain. Roughly is where Alice Nutter farmed before her execution. There is the site of Malkin Tower, where the supposed witches' meeting took place. The landscape has not changed. Fields still rise toward the hill. Farmhouses still shelter in the valleys. Walking those paths, you walk where they walked, accused of impossible crimes by neighbors who feared what they could not understand. The Pendle Heritage Center approaches this history carefully. This is not Halloween entertainment. These were real people who died terrified and in pain. Visitors who come looking for witchcraft tourism are sometimes disappointed by the lack of drama. There are no cackling witches or bubbling cauldrons. There are only records of injustice and a hill that watched it happen. So there you have it. 15 places across Britain where something is deeply wrong. Some are wrong in ways that attract ghost hunters and thrill seekers, unexplained lights, documented hauntings, the atmospheric weight of violent history. Others are wrong in ways that should make us angry. Communities destroyed for military convenience and never returned, villages drowned without consent, industrial negligence that killed children, desperate people executed for impossible crimes. Britain's landscape holds all of this: the thatched cottages and the mass graves, the cream teas and the contaminated soil, the picture postcards and the parish records that document things too unsettling for tourism brochures. These places exist whether we visit them or not. Understanding them is part of understanding where we live. The land remembers what we prefer to forget. If you have visited any of these places, or if you know of similar locations that deserve attention, I want to hear from you. Comments from people who actually live with these histories are worth more than any archive. Tell me what I got right. Tell me what I missed. Tell me about the villages in your own area where locals still speak carefully, where certain questions produce silence, where the past refuses to stay buried. These stories matter. The places are real, the history is documented, and the warnings, whether whispered in pubs or written in parish records, are worth heeding.
The last curtain twitches shut, the green empties, and the church clock keeps a time the village stopped trusting long ago. But the final place on this map is the one you would least expect to fear. The fire is lit. The glasses are warm. The regulars are at the bar talking as they do every night. And still, after all these years, not one of them will sit in a certain corner. The table stays empty. The stool stays empty. If a stranger sits there, the locals will wait until they leave. Some say they have tried to sit there and found themselves standing elsewhere without remembering the walk. The corner remains unmarked and unwelcoming. No sign marks it, no railing protects it. Yet nobody ever sits there twice.
Let us begin with a place that claims to be the oldest pub in all of Britain, the Skirrid Inn in Monmouthshire, Wales. First mentioned in records from 1110, this stone building has stood for over 900 years on the slopes of the Skirrid Mountain. Drive through the village of Llanfihangel Crewcorny on a quiet afternoon, and you might see nothing more than a charming country pub serving real ale. Look closer, and the picture changes entirely. It is rumoured that around 180 hangings took place on the inn's staircase. The beam still bears the rope marks worn into the wood by centuries of executions. Judge Jeffreys, known throughout history as the Hanging Judge, allegedly began his brutal career here during the Monmouth Rebellion. Guests climbing those stairs today pass beneath the very timber where condemned men took their final breaths. The activity reported here is not subtle. There are multiple accounts of visitors suddenly dropping to their knees and grabbing their throats, as if being strangled by invisible hands. Staff have reported cold spots that move through rooms. Glasses slide across the bar untouched. The surrounding woods carry their own tragedy. In 1700, a servant girl who worked at the inn fell in love with the lord of the local manor. When his wife discovered the affair, She chased the young woman into the forest. The girl's body was found the next morning, frozen to death against a tree. The woods are now called the White Lady Woods because her spirit is still seen floating through the trees in a pale dress. Travelling southwest to Cornwall, we find an inn that sits alone on one of England's most desolate landscapes. Jamaica Inn on Bodmin Moor. Built in 1750 as a coaching inn, its isolation made it perfect for smugglers moving contraband across the county. Daphne du Maurier made it famous in her 1936 novel. But the hauntings were documented long before her book. The first recorded paranormal incident occurred in 1911. A man dressed in old-fashioned clothing was seen sitting on the outside wall. When locals tried to speak with him, he ignored them completely. Then he gradually faded from view and disappeared. This sighting has been followed by consistent reports from staff and guests right up to the present day. In 2004, the television programme Most Haunted filmed an episode here. The production team called it one of the spookiest investigations they had ever recorded. Previous managers have heard conversations in a foreign tongue that some believe could be Old Cornish, a language that died out centuries ago. Visitors report the sound of horses and carts in the courtyard when nothing is there. Children playing and babies crying echo through empty corridors. The moor surrounding the inn stretches dark and treeless for miles. On foggy nights, travellers have reported seeing lights moving across the landscape where no roads exist. From Cornwall, we travel to Gloucestershire, to a building that openly advertises itself as the most haunted place in England, the ancient Ram Inn in Wotton under Edge. This Grade 2 star-listed building dates from around 1145. It served first as lodging for workers building the parish church opposite, then as a priest's house, before becoming an inn. The stories here go beyond ghosts. During renovations, the skeletal remains of children were discovered beneath the staircase, alongside broken ritual daggers. The room, known as the Witch's Room, marks where a woman fleeing persecution in the 1500s hid before being captured and burned at the stake. The late owner, John Humphreys, claimed that on his first night in the building, he was grabbed by a demonic force and dragged across the floor. Investigators have reported temperature drops of 20 degrees in seconds. Objects move on their own. Figures appear in doorways and vanish. Heading north to Scotland, we find the Drovers Inn on the shores of Loch Lomond. Dating back to 1705, this remote establishment served cattle drovers moving their herds to market. The interior remains deliberately unchanged. Stuffed animals line the walls. Antique weapons hang from beams. Staff sometimes wear Highland dress. But it is room 6 that draws the most attention. Local legend tells of a family travelling south during a fierce winter storm. They were trying to reach the safety of the inn, but took a wrong path in the blinding snow. The family froze to death on the hillside. Guests sleeping in room 6 have reported feeling an icy presence dripping water onto their beds in the dead of night. The ghost is said to be a young girl who drowned in the nearby river while trying to retrieve her doll. Her body was laid out in that very room. Visitors have woken to find a small figure standing at the foot of their bed, soaking wet and staring. Returning to England, we arrive in the ancient city of York. The Golden Fleece on pavement claims to be the most haunted pub in a city already famous for its ghosts. Built in 1503, the building has accumulated at least 15 documented spirits over 5 centuries. The most active is Lady Alice Peckett, wife of a former mayor who once owned the building. She appears in Victorian dress, wandering the corridors at night. A Canadian airman who fell to his death from an upper window during the World War II has been seen in his uniform. One-eyed Jack haunts the bottom bar, wearing a red coat from the 1600s and carrying a pistol. A Victorian boy who was trampled by horses in the yard still runs through the building. staff working alone have reported all 15 apparitions at various times. Before we continue, we must understand what connects these places. Rural inns and taverns have been the beating hearts of their communities for centuries. They witnessed deals struck and broken, travellers arriving and sometimes never leaving, justice dispensed and occasionally perverted. It is hardly surprising that dark episodes occurred within their walls. Historic England has documented hundreds of these buildings, preserving not just their architecture, but their stories. A 2023 survey found that around 28% of British adults believe they have experienced something paranormal. That figure rises to 34% among those over 65. Whatever we believe about ghosts, the histories attached to these buildings are real. The deaths occurred. The violence happened. The walls absorbed it all. On the south coast in the medieval town of Rye stands the Mermaid Inn. Built in the 1420s and rebuilt after a French raid in 1420, its cellars contain tunnels that once connected to buildings across the town. In the 1730s, the infamous Hawkhurst gang used these tunnels for smuggling. They would sit in the bar openly armed, daring anyone to challenge them. A young maid fell in love with one of these cutthroats. When the gang feared she knew too much about their operations, they murdered her. Her ghost still walks the public rooms on the ground floor. Guests have reported waking to find a woman in period dress standing in their room, then passing straight through the wall. In Wiltshire, the Red Lion at Avebury holds a unique distinction. It is the only pub in the world located inside a prehistoric stone circle. The stones surrounding this building are over 4,000 years old. The pub itself dates from the 16th century. The most famous ghost is Florrie. During the English Civil War, her husband returned home to find her with another man. He slit her throat and threw her body down the well that still exists inside the pub today. Florrie has haunted the building ever since and reportedly has a particular interest in men with beards. A phantom carriage has been seen clattering through the yard. At least 5 different ghosts have been documented here, their presence perhaps amplified by the ancient stones that surround the building. In a hidden mews in London, the Grenadier began life in 1720 as an officer's mess for the Duke of Wellington's regiment. The story goes that in 1820 a young officer was caught cheating at cards. His fellow soldiers beat him so severely that he died that night in the cellar. Reports of paranormal activity date back to the 1880s. Sudden temperature drops, invisible shoulders barging into customers, footsteps on empty stairs. In the 1960s, a worker was thrown down the cellar stairs by unseen hands. A few years later, a barman watched an army helmet fly off the wall and strike him on the head. Today, visitors stick coins to the ceiling. The tradition says the money helps pay the dead soldier's gambling debts, so his spirit might finally rest. Your Old Trip to Jerusalem in Nottingham claims to be the oldest inn in England, dating from 1189. Built directly into the caves beneath Nottingham Castle, its rock walls were carved by hand over 8 centuries ago. George Henry Ward, known as Yorkie to the regulars, was landlord from 1894 to 1914. He loved his job so much that he apparently never left. Staff report objects moving on their own and a presence that watches from the carved stone alcoves. The Castle Inn in Great Leys, Essex, may be even older. The building claims to date from 1086, and it is recorded in the Domesday Book. Over 100 brave souls have attempted to spend a night in its haunted room. Reports describe furniture dragging across the floor on its own, curtains violently ripped from their rails, and the tortured cries of a woman that prevent any sleep at all. A local witch named Anne Hughes was executed and buried near the pub in the 17th century. Her spirit is blamed for centuries of disturbances. In Tewkesbury, the Black Bear Inn is the oldest in Gloucestershire. A headless man in army uniform drags chains through its corridors. He is believed to be a Lancastrian soldier who died in the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. Guests have seen him walking through walls where doors once existed centuries ago. At the George and Pilgrims in Glastonbury, a tunnel once connected the inn to the famous abbey. A monk and a local woman used this passage for their forbidden affair. When discovered, the monk was walled up alive in the cellar and left to die. His ghostly figure still appears to guests, particularly women staying alone. Bristol's Hatchet Inn carries perhaps the most disturbing claim of all. Built in 1606, beneath layers of wood and plaster, the front door is allegedly lined with human skin. The pub hosted bare-knuckle boxing, dogfighting, and rat pits. The violence that occurred within these walls over 4 centuries has left something behind that visitors still sense today. Your Old King's Head in Chester dates from 1622. 13. Different ghosts reportedly cause incidents once or twice a week. The sound of children laughing echoes through empty rooms at night. The top floor flat has stood vacant for years because no tenant will stay. Investigators recorded voices saying, "I was told to hang myself and I want to die." Finally, we arrive at the 10 Bells in Spitalfields, London. This pub stands in the heart of Jack the Ripper territory. At least 2 of his victims drank here before their deaths in 1888. But the hauntings are not Ripper related. A Victorian landlord named George Roberts was murdered with an axe. His apparition has terrorised staff on the upper floors. There are darker tales still of a murdered infant that have made mediums refuse to enter the upstairs rooms entirely. So there you have it. 15 country pubs across Britain where locals warn strangers not to stay after dark. Some carry reputations built on documented deaths and historical violence. Others hold mysteries that centuries have failed to explain. Whether the spirits are real matters less than what these stories reveal. Isolation, tragedy, justice and its failures. Communities process darkness into folklore that spans generations. These buildings have stood for centuries. They have witnessed more than any living person can remember. The walls absorbed it all.
All of this is ordinary. That is the part that stays with you. We drive these roads, we wait on these platforms, we drink in these rooms, and the dread was never in some faraway ruin. It was on the way home all along, in the same dark that sits outside your own window right now. The lamp at the end of the lane is still burning. The road is still empty at that bend. Nobody walks it after dark.